We discovered a cursed entity in deep space. 12 terrifying days of Sinister haunting the night the Thompson family unwrapped the strange artifact. Darkness crept into their lives in ways they never imagined. Jenna and Tommy had just settled down at the table, the warm amber glow of the kitchen light flickering as they giggled over their new treasure. "Maybe it's a gold bar," Tommy exclaimed, eyes wide with excitement. But their father, George, only smiled, his heart heavy with the weight of the bills stacked in the corner of the kitchen. Bill collectors had become the unwelcome ghosts haunting his thoughts. He tore the wrapping paper open, revealing the beautifully crafted object, its intricate designs reminiscent of ancient tales. It intrigued them, setting their imaginations ablaze with visions of adventure. But what they couldn't see was the roiling malevolence lurking inside. The air thickened, and as they passed the artifact between them, a chill swept through the room, sending shivers down their spines. Unbeknownst to them, that evening would mark the beginning of a nightmare. The first sinister element flickered into view moments later. Jenna's laughter caught in her throat when her favorite doll, left untouched on the shelf, suddenly crashed to the floor. Its porcelain face, cracked and eerie, seemed to stare back at her. "Mom! Dad!" she shrieked, clutching Tommy's arm. Their parents exchanged nervous glances, but George shook it off as a child's overactive imagination. Yet, as the evening wore on, that nervous feeling settled into all of them. The whispers started slowly at first, like distant echoes carrying regret through the house. Sarah felt a familiar dread creeping in, memories of unkind childhood tales filling her mind, stories spun by the older folks at church about malevolent spirits, long buried in the town's history. The sinister undercurrents of Maplewood combined with the artifact began to twist their reality. George found himself distracted at work, seeing fleeting shadows behind him, the sensation of being watched crawling over him like icy fingers. Days passed as the family became increasingly on edge, and then it all spiraled. Jenna's toys began to disappear, only to re-emerge in twisted places under the porch, perched on the roof as if mocking her fear. Tommy wailed one night about a figure he saw in his window, a dark silhouette gliding through the trees, shrouded in the night. "It's just your imagination," George would insist, though he couldn't shake the dread creeping into his own heart. "Before we continue, I need to tell you something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to their system and many people are missing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and select all notifications so you don't miss future videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps me with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. Each night grew longer, filled with terror. Objects moved of their own accord, shadows lengthened unnaturally in corners, and cold chills wrapped around them like specters. George's encounters with Sheriff Bennett only deepened the mystery, the sheriff with his calm demeanor, twinkling eyes, and barely concealed smirk as he brushed off George's fears. "Just looks can be deceiving, George," he chuckled. But dread pooled deep within him. There was something off about that man, like a villain wrapped in a hero's cloak. Panic struck like lightning when Jenna collapsed, her eyes rolling back as she cried out in terror. "It won't let us leave," she screamed, the haunting words ricocheting in their hearts. That chilling moment pierced through their family bonds, bringing tension and doubt that twisted tighter with each sinister moment. They had to face this terror together, unearth the town's buried secrets, or watch it consume them whole. As the shadows thickened and whispers deepened, the Thompsons stood at a precipice, staring into an abyss that might claim them all. The night pressed on, heavy with promise and lurking dread, leaving them whispering in the dark about what horrors awaited as the days of their haunting unfolded before them. Jenna's screams echoed through the darkened house, a desperate sound that hung in the air like a death knell. George felt his heart hammering against his ribs, a wild thing trying to escape. "Jenna, honey, breathe," he shouted, rushing to her side to steady her quivering body. Tommy, wide-eyed and pale, clung to the doorframe, frozen in a terror so pure it paralyzed him. The kitchen light flickered again, an unsettling harsh glow illuminating the walls that felt suddenly too close, too menacing. When Jenna finally regained her composure, her sobs filled the heavy silence, and George felt the weight of her frightened gaze. "Dad, it saw me. I saw its face," she gasped, wiping away tears. "It has no eyes. Just darkness." "Maybe it's just a dream, sweetie," Sarah said softly, though her hands trembled as she ruffled Jenna's hair, trying to comfort her. Doubt hung thick over her words. How could something that crept through the corner of her home feel so overwhelmingly real? "I don't want to be here anymore," Tommy cried, his voice a jagged edge. "I want to go back to the old house before it came." Panic coiled tightly around George's throat. They couldn't leave, the bills, the life they built, it was all tethered to this house. Yet, a sinister chill shot down his spine, whispering that it wouldn't be long before this darkness would consume them whole. The next day dawned gray and unsettling. George could barely focus on work, the shadows seemed to whisper his name, teasing him with their darkness. He returned home early, unease gnawing at him like a hungry beast. As he entered the house, the silence was suffocating. "Jenna? Tommy?" he called, moving cautiously through the dim living room. No response. Then he heard a low, guttural growl reverberating from the basement, pulling him in like a siren-esque call. The sound filled him with dread and curiosity. He had to know. The basement door creaked ominously as he descended the stairs, the air thick with something heavy and rancid. Shadows clung eagerly to the corners, rustling softly as if aware of his presence. With each step, an icy breeze curled around him, making the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. Then he saw it, the artifact they had unwrapped, pulsating with a sinister glow, now resting on a makeshift altar of old, decaying toys. It appeared to be alive, twisting and writhing like a serpent, and the whispers intensified, echoing through the walls, clawing at his mind. George, the whispers called his name, seductive and menacing, begging for an answer, a commitment. Fear surged through him, but he also noticed something else, a glimpse of familiarity in the designs carved on its surface. They reminded him of the stories, the rituals of sacrifice that Sheriff Bennett had once shared over friendly drinks. Suddenly, he heard footsteps from behind. He turned sharply, heart racing, only to find Sarah and the kid standing just at the top of the stairs, eyes wide with panic. "Dad! What are you doing?" Sarah shouted, concern coloring her voice. But it was too late. The artifact throbbed in response, a malevolent pulse that sent shockwaves through the air. The atmosphere shifted, darkening, as if the house itself drew in breath, preparing for something much worse. "What did we unleash?" George whispered, as the playthings on the altar erupted, launching shadows that coiled toward them like hungry snakes. The doorway suddenly slammed shut, vibrations crackling with unnatural force, trapping them within the suffocating darkness. The sinister whispers grew louder, transformed into mocking laughter. And amidst the chaos, George realized, they weren't just facing a haunted artifact. They had awakened something far older, something that held the town's darkest secrets. Time was running out. Would they find a way to escape this nightmare, or was it already too late? As the walls began to close around them, a chilling thought struck him: what if there was no escape? The shadows loomed larger, and just as despair settled in, a chilling voice echoed from the darkness, promising them freedom at a terrible cost. What price would they be willing to pay to survive the curse? George's blood ran cold as he felt cold fingers brush against his neck. A choice loomed before them, a road paved with desperation and dread. Would they dare take it? The darkness swelled around George like a thick fog, pressing down on his chest. He could barely breathe. Panic turned his limbs to lead, but the insidious laughter closed in, echoing from all sides. "Dad!" Jenna's voice broke through the swirling shadows, frantic and trembling. "What is happening?" "Stay close!" George shouted, fighting against the pull of the whispers, fighting to focus on his family amid the chaos. The kids needed him. Sarah was there, too. He had to protect them, but as he spun around, the air vibrated with a dissonant hum, thrumming through his bones, drowning out Jenna's pleas. The artifact pulsated ominously, shadows writhing violently. It felt alive, like a predator, eager to consume. "Let us get out," Sarah urged, fear glinting in her eyes like sharp glass. "We have to get to the door." The wooden door stood solid behind them, yet it felt like a barrier to another world. With every heartbeat, the distance seemed to stretch, mocking their desperate cries. Suddenly, the shadows surged forward, tendrils of darkness reaching out, grasping at the air with cold claws. George could see little faces twisted, anguished expressions that flickered like reflections in murky water. That was wrong. He had to move. "Hold on," he yelled, grabbing Jenna's arm and pulling her closer. But as he did, something sharp pricked at his neck, and he froze. A thin stream of warmth trickled down, yet the sensation was quickly swallowed by the icy grip of fear. He spun around, scanning the dim space, but all he could see was blackness, coiling like smoke. "George!" Sarah cried, her voice cracking. The shadows shifted, revealing their true form, figures locked in eternal torment. They twisted and writhed, faces half-masked in darkness. Their mouths moved, drearily mimicking the laughter that haunted the room. "Do you see them?" Jenna's voice trembled near his ear. "They want us no." George shouted, shaking his head, but the truth gnawed at him. These were lost souls, condemned to a fate worse than death. The realization crashed over him like a tide. They were linked to the artifact. It was a doorway to something primal, something deeply malicious. "Get out!" he screamed, pushing Jenna and Tommy toward the door as Sarah stumbled, eyes wide with horror, yet, the darkness surged, blocking their escape, crawling over their legs like 1,000 tiny spiders. The whispers promised comfort, telling of old, forgotten things that thrived in the dark. It was intoxicating. "No!" George fought against the grip of the shadows, but his strength was fading. He felt dizzy, the whispers tugging at his consciousness, tugging at his will. "Do you want to be free?" The voice slithered through the air, echoing tauntingly. "Join us, serve us." The laughter turned sinister, like the cackling of 1,000 children playing games they could never win. He turned his head, looking at his family. Jenna was crying, Tommy was trembling. And Sarah, always so strong, looked lost in the blackness, eyes darting as though something unseen held her captive. "Mom!" Tommy whimpered, stretching his hand. But she was slipping. The shadows were swallowing her, seeping into her skin. "Fight it!" George shouted. "Fight them!" Losing grip on sanity, he stepped forward, desperate. He had to save them, had to tear them from this malevolence. He yanked at Sarah's arm with all his might, but the shadows tightened their hold. In one final act of defiance, he grasped the artifact, feeling its malignant thrum seep through his fingers. "Let her go!" he bellowed, desperation turning into fury, fueling his courage. But the artifact laughed. "What will you sacrifice for her freedom?" It hissed, the shadows stirring around them like a maelstrom. "Anything!" George shouted, every word dripping with intent. But then, deep down, a seed of doubt tugged at him. A question screamed in his mind. What if the price was more than he could ever pay? A loud shriek pierced through the eternal whispers, mingling with a chilling silence as the darkness twisted violently. Would he dare to find out? As shadows swirled and thickened around them, the artifact pulsed with an insatiable hunger for their souls. Time shattered, racing toward an unspeakable choice looming just beyond the darkness. Would they stand and fight, or would they succumb to the undying whispers that beckoned with promises of haunting freedom? George clutched the artifact tightly, its jagged edges digging into his palm, the pulsating energy coursing through him. He could feel the shadows creeping closer, the chill of them wrapping around his legs. Jenna and Tommy were screaming now, their voices swallowed by the encroaching darkness. He could barely make out Sarah's form, struggling against the grip of despair. "Stay together," he shouted, attempting to cut through the chaos. Each word was a battle against the void that loomed over them, a fight against the suffocating darkness that seemed to swallow sound itself. The laughter grew louder, circling them like vultures. "It's too late," a voice taunted, hollow and disembodied, floating through the air like smoke. "You can't save her. You'll only become one of us." "Shut up," George yelled, pushing against the shadows with everything he had. But the shadows were relentless. They wanted to drag him down into their abyss. He could feel the cold tendrils snaking up his legs, causing him to tremble. "Dad!" Jenna cried again, her fragile voice slicing through the noise. "Please, help Mom." In that moment, strength surged within him, ignited by the fear in his children's voices. The artifact pulsed, and he squeezed his eyes shut, focusing on love, on the need to save his family. Rage morphed into a blaze of determination as he swung the artifact wildly, creating a barrier against the shadows. "Get back!" he bellowed, swinging it from side to side like a weapon, as tendrils recoiled in its wake. The pressure eased, just enough for him to pull Sarah's other arm. "Come on, Sarah. Fight!" he urged, desperately trying to rouse her from the stupor that held her captive, but her eyes were glazed, reflecting a light that was not there. "George the First," her voice faltered, drowning in the mist of hopelessness. "Sarah, listen to me. You can break free. Remember the kids. We have to get out of here." There was a flicker of recognition in her gaze, a moment when the shadows faltered. Just then, a piercing shriek erupted from the darkness, more feral than human. "Join us! Join us!" repeated the twisting specters, their faces contorting in agony and glee, their hands reaching forward, grasping, pulling. Suddenly, George felt a sharp tug, a weight pulling him toward the void. He glanced back at his children, their faces painted in sheer terror. They were watching, paralyzed. The shadows, sensing his hesitation, surged forward. "Angela!" he screamed, the triggering name the specters latched onto, as fear coursed through him. "You don't own us." In a sudden burst of adrenaline, he tugged harder on Sarah, trying to yank her away from the shadow's grasp. But it was too late. A deafening crack echoed around them, the artifact's energy burst forth like a supernova, blinding light scattering the shadows. It was a moment of liberation and horror. The shadows reeled back as if stung, but they weren't defeated. They lashed out, baring teeth that dripped darkness. "Finish the ritual," whined a voice that slithered through the air, desperation woven within its pitch. It echoed like a charge through the crowd of shadows, paralyzing George for just a heartbeat. "They have to pay," it continued, malevolent glee thick in its murmur. Violently, the darkness twisted around him, trying to envelop his senses. The air grew thick, bitter, suffocating. Despair clawed at him, ripping at his resolve. "Sacrifice!" the whisper hissed. "Let us go!" George barked, his heart racing as he pulled Jenna and Tommy closer, the artifact thrumming in his hands. Then, amid the chaos, reality twisted sharply. A vision burst through the darkness, shadows banishing light, children being pulled into the maw of nightmares, their laughter echoing. Endless faces twisted in agony. "No!" With a cavernous roar, George plunged forward, unyielding. The light flared, illuminating a glimmering path through the shadows behind him. A soft voice whispered, carrying malice, "You cannot escape, the price must be paid." As the light swallowed him, he felt himself slipping, the last vestige of clarity fading. Would this artifact claim them all, or was it their only hope? The darkness shivered, the laughter rising, shifting shapes looming at the edge of vision, embodying the horror around and inside him. They stood on the brink of an unknown abyss. Would they dare to take the leap, or would the darkness conquer all? The blinding light surged, cutting through the oppressive darkness like a knife. George could feel the heat on his skin, but it was mingled with the cold dread that wrapped around his heart. Shadows recoiled, wailing in anguish, but their mournful cries transformed into a symphony of rage. The ground trembled beneath him, as if the very earth was awakening to witness the horrors lurking in its depths. "Stay close!" he shouted again, desperately pulling Sarah, Jenna, and Tommy together. The artifact hummed violently in his grip, spilling radiant energy that temporarily pushed back the phantoms. Each flicker of light sent the shades thrashing, but they were relentless, stretching their ghastly figures toward them again, claws seeking flesh. "George, what do we do?" Jenna stammered, tears glistening in her eyes, reflecting both the light and the encroaching darkness. "Fight!" he commanded, harnessing every ounce of courage he had. "Fight for each other. Fight for our family." He spotted a fleeting glimpse of Sarah, anguish flickering on her face as the shadows grasped at the edges of her sanity. "Sarah! You have to believe in us." Her expression twisted in confusion, but suddenly she jolted, as if remembering something lost in the fog. The shadows hesitated. "Remember the park?" she murmured, her voice breaking. "The swings? The sun on our skin, yes," George affirmed, his heart pounding with hope. "Think of the light. Think of what we have." The artifact pulsed brighter, hovering with a fierce intensity. Shadows enveloped them, and unseen hands tugged at their souls, but a spark ignited in Sarah's eyes. "I won't let go," she shouted fiercely. The shadows writhed. Pain seeped into the air as their laughter turned manic, echoing off unseen walls. "You cannot keep what must be sacrificed," the disembodied voice yowled. "The ritual demands blood." George's grip tightened. "We are not your pawns." He shoved the artifact forward, a desperate extension of his spirit towards the abyss they faced. The air thickened, each breath like swallowing shards of glass. The shadows clawed at them, becoming entities of pure terror. The ground split open, revealing a pit of writhing shapes and whispers. "Join us!" The voices clamored, promising untold power, eternal life beyond the mundane. George felt the lure, a siren song tugging at his mind, but he fought it, fervently shaking his head. "I'd rather die than become one of you." Suddenly, a sharp pain radiated from the artifact, almost as if it were responding to his defiance. "Let it take you." The shadows howled, their rage escalating, fury manifesting in wild storms of darkness that lashed out at the family. But Jenny's voice shattered the chaos. "No. We're stronger together." She reached out, grasping Tommy's hand as he tightly held on to their father. "We can beat them." That bond echoed through the collective terror. The darkness shuddered, losing its grip just enough for them to push forward, step by step. Each movement became a prayer, an act of defiance against encroaching despair. "Keep moving," George urged, heart hammering as he started toward the flicker of light that remained a distance away, a fragile beacon of hope amidst the storm. But behind them, the darkness surged with a thunderous roar. It wasn't done. Not yet. Shapes thrashed violently, clawing toward the light streaming from the artifact, desperately trying to reclaim what it had lost. George's breath seized in his throat as he felt the cold fingers of panic snake around his heart again. Would they escape the nightmare? Would it claim them all? And then just ahead a shadow emerged, darker and more powerful than the rest. It coalesced into a figure, one that bore a haunting resemblance to someone he wished he could forget. "Angela," he whispered, dread wrapping around his voice like chains. The figure smiled, but there was nothing warm about it. The smile was twisted, a mockery. "You have come so far, but this is where it ends." George felt the heaviness settle back over him, clinging like a shroud. His heart raced as Angela's form melted into smoke, the darkness with it. It was a trap. "Run!" he shouted to the kids, but he felt rooted in place as shadows twisted around him, pulling him back. Desperation clawed at him. Would he lose everything? The laughter that surrounded them climbed to a fever pitch, echoing through the abyss, and around him, shadows twisted, and reality warped. A flicker of determination surged through him. We will escape. And then darkness surged, spinning into chaos. Would they be swallowed whole? Would they be the next victims of the curse? As the shadows closed in, choking out the last glimmers of hope, the artifact pulsed violently, threatening to either save or doom them all in an instant. The shadows roiled like a living beast, hungry and insatiable. As they swarmed in, George felt his heart race, pumping adrenaline through his veins. The artifact burned in his grip, the light flickering as though it sensed the danger closing in. Tommy. Jenna. Sarah. He shouted, trying to pierce through the fog of terror thickening around him. Their faces swam in the darkness, pale and frightened. We can't let it take us. George urged fiercely. We have to trust each other. Jenna squeezed Tommy's hand tight, her eyes darting back toward the wretched figures grasping at them from the depths of the inky night. But what if it's too strong? She whispered, her voice cracking under the weight of impending doom. Then we fight. We fight together. His words crackled with urgency, a desperate promise to his family. They had shared love, laughter, memories. They could weave those threads into something stronger than the darkness. With a sudden surge of resolve, he took a step towards the encroaching shadows. Light! Shine! He bellowed, thrusting the artifact forward as if to pierce the heart of despair. The glowing orb pulsed like a heartbeat, radiating heat that cut through the chill. For a moment, the shadows hesitated, their clawed hands retracting as if stung. But that moment was short-lived. An oppressive roar enveloped them, and the darkness sprinkled in sickly laughter as it lunged again, more ferocious than before. Stay with me. George cried out, glancing back at his kids. Sarah's face twisted in fear, her balance faltering as a shadow lunged toward her. He reached desperately, grabbing her hand. She felt cold, like ice, but he held on tight. Stay with me, don't let go. Dad, what if we can't fight it? What if it wins? Sarah trembled, her voice barely a whisper over the cacophony around them. An anguished screech erupted from the abyss, snapping George back to reality. We are not giving in. He twisted the artifact like a sword, aiming its blinding light at Angela's twisted figure that loomed beyond the dark. Do you remember the promise? George shouted, summoning every ounce of conviction he could muster. We said we would protect each other, no matter what. Suddenly, the shadows writhed more violently than before, the laughter escalating to a deafening crescendo. With ear-splitting intensity, the darkness coiled, its whispers transforming into a singular, chilling command. Blood for freedom. Fear clutched at George's throat as he felt the weight of those words sink into his bones, a horrible clarity settling in. They needed to offer something. They needed to sacrifice something of themselves. No. Tommy's voice rose over the madness, tremors of determination spilling forth. We don't owe them anything. We can't give up what makes us us. We're a family. The shadows faltered again, as if struck by the sheer strength of his words. The artifact trembled in George's hand, its light flaring brighter, fighting against the encroaching tide. Without thinking, George yelled, "Focus on the swings." The park. The afternoon spent laughing with no worries. Each memory, each moment held together by love began to dance in their minds. The ground under them trembled as the shadows faltered, a crack in their armor. But then, from the corner of his eye, George saw a silhouette emerging from the masses. It glided forward with an inhumane grace, eyes glinting like polished obsidian. He recognized it instantly, but couldn't allow the familiarity to distract him. Stop! He commanded, mustering every ounce of authority. You can't have us. The figure paused, a sinister smile creeping across its face. You think you can win? This is an eternal prison. I will take my due no. George roared, thrusting the artifact outward again. The blinding light surged forth, expanding like a barrier, a desperate shield against the swirling darkness, but was it enough? As the echoes of their fear surrounded them, a vision darkened George's mind, a vision of loss, of surrender, of everything he loved being devoured. Never, he gasped, clutching the artifact as it radiated an otherworldly heat. In that moment, darkness converged, furious and hungry. Would they succumb to the void? Or would they rise, united, to face the insatiable darkness? The shadows closed in, thrumming with power, and in the dimness, the floating face of Angela beckoned, closer and closer, her promise dripped with honeyed malevolence. Join me or perish. At that moment, the fabric of their fate twisted with the air thickening around them, leaving one looming question resounding in the chaos: what would they sacrifice to reclaim the light? The moment the shadows lunged, a deafening silence pierced the air for George. Time seemed to stretch infinitely. The figure of Angela twirled in the darkness, her hollow gaze locking onto him. The artifact flickered weakly, its light struggling as though sensing its fate. In that chilling instant, the whispers intensified, a swarm of voices clamoring, their tones hoarse and mocking. You cannot escape the inevitable, you belong to us now. The chorus cut through George's resolve like a sharpened blade. Fight! Jenna screamed, her voice a lifeline amidst the encroaching dread. It rang clear, like a bell defying a storm. He felt their grip tighten, his children, his lifeline. They were all he had. He remembered their last summer trip, laughter echoing under the sun, and it reignited the fire in his chest. Gather your memories. He roared, fueling every word with conviction. Now! Jenna, Tommy, and Sarah closed their eyes, fear mingling with hope. Images flashed before them, warm lunches, birthday cakes, cozy nights by the fireplace. Each glimmer of joy became a shield, vibrating in their minds as the shadows recoiled. But Angela's figure surged forward, a tempest of malice, her smile widening grotesquely. She reached out, shadowed fingers stretched towards them, and George felt a chilling rip crawl up his spine. You can't protect them. It is too late. Shut up. George spat, his fury igniting. He gripped the artifact tighter, holding it before him like a torch against the engulfing night. You don't control us. A surge of warmth engulfed him as visions twisted again, memories morphing into vibrant colors. Yet shadows crept, creeping in like ink, threatening to drown the light. Tommy! Your guitar! George shouted. The boy nodded, snapping out of the haze. Play! Play that song! With shaking hands, Tommy clutched his guitar, fingers moving instinctively to the strings. A hesitant chord shattered through the tension, the sound rising above the snarls of the darkness. Sing! George urged, desperation threading through each syllable. Tommy let loose a melody, shaky but pure, mixing fragments of their favorite songs into an anthem of defiance. Jenna and Sarah joined in, voices blending as tears flowed. The air vibrated, resonating with love that pushed back against the darkness, reverberating within the shadows, the laughter echoed, breaking the silence. For a moment, the horrors recoiled, the walls of despair fracturing. But Angela's laughter rang out, drowning the music, sinister and suffocating. Is this all it takes to resist? Songs and memories? More than that. George shouted, their voices climbing higher, mixing with determination. We are a family. We will not give in. The artifact blazed, almost blinding, amplifying their singing into a spectral barrier that pushed back against the shadows. The darkness shrieked, curling like flames rejected by water. George thought he saw hope glimmering in the abyss, yet, Angela's figure widened, fissures of shadow snapping at the edges of the barrier. Sacrifice. That's the only way. Give me what I desire. As George looked into his children's eyes, he felt the weight of her demand crawl over him, cold and unyielding. What must we give? His heart raced, the question echoing in the void of terror. Jenna's grip tightened around his arm. No more. We can fight without giving anything. Can we? George's stomach twisted painfully. The light flickered again, vibrant but wavering. Angela lingered, her laughter crawling under their skin. You'll see, soon. As the shadows surged one last time, their forces clashing in a blur of darkness and light, George felt the barest flicker of despair worming its way through his heart, a knot tightening in the pit of his stomach. Could they withstand it? Would unity be powerful enough to resist Angela's promise? As darkness swept in like a tidal wave, he couldn't shake the sinking feeling gnawing at him. What if to save his family, they had to lose everything? A final, sharp scream erupted from their throats as the shadows closed in again, but this time, a fitting shard unleashed itself within the chaos, and beneath it all lay a chilling question: how much would be enough to break the bonds they cherished? The shadows collided with an intensity that shook the very ground beneath them. George's heartbeat thudded painfully in his chest, a drum marking the final moments of peace. He felt the cold breath of despair licking at his skin, a monstrous chill that tried to seep into his bones. Keep singing, George commanded, forcing his voice to rise above the chaos. Even as darkness surged, he held on to every ounce of hope, every fragment of love. The artifact now pulsed feverishly, trembling between them, a beacon flickering against the impending gloom. Tommy strummed harder, fingers flying over the strings, the melody flooding the air. But with every note, the shadows lurked, draping over them like a shroud, closing in with sinister intent. George caught sight of Angela, her face twisting in cruel delight, eyes glinting with insatiable hunger. You play for me now, boy. Play your last tune before I take what's mine, she taunted, her voice a venomous whisper. A tremor vibrated through Tommy as he played, but he pressed on, the guitar wailing in protest. Jenna's voice cracked yet held firm beside him. We can't give in, we have to fight. Sarah echoed, her words barely breaking through the rising tide of despair, but George's mind spiraled with panic. What does she want? He thought, grasping at straws as fear clawed at his throat. What do you desire, Angela? He shouted, defiance dancing on his lips. What's it going to take to leave us alone? The oppressive darkness paused, as if considering his question. Angela's laughter, shrill and echoing, pierced through the tension. I just need a little taste of your love. Such sweet sacrifice, don't you want to keep your family safe? Her words slithered into George's mind, filling him with dread. Could surrender be the only option left to them? The shadows writhed, curling eagerly around the artifact, trying to snuff its light. Focus. He urged his family, desperate not to let fear consume them. Remember why we fight. Remember what we love. Images flooded his mind again, their backyard barbecues, the warmth of summer evenings, bedtime stories woven with laughter. Angela's form loomed closer, he could see her jagged smile. Silly man, it won't matter how much you cling to memories when I show you what real sacrifice looks like. As if summoned by her words, darkness slithered through the cracks in their shield, creeping toward his children with malicious intent. George felt numb as he glimpsed shadows reaching toward Sarah. No! He roared, his heart shattering at the thought of losing even a moment of their unity. Hold on! He bellowed, the despair of impending doom sparking fury within him. He squeezed the artifact, channels of defiance flowing through him. We are a family. The light blazed, a fire igniting as their memories enshrouded them, pushing back the shadowy tendrils. The music morphed into a rallying cry, booming fiercely against the figure of Angela who wavered, momentarily losing her grip. But a shadow whipped around George's ankle, dragging him down. You need to sacrifice something more than your memories, it whispered. A piercing ache surged through him, clarity cut like glass. No. I won't give you anything. You can't have us. With a roar that shook the very air, George pulled against the force, tensing every muscle in his body. But doubt began to seep in. What if the darkness was right? What if to save them, he had to offer something more? The shadows sneered, relentless as darkness whirled around them, thickening, constricting. Above all, a horrid realization crashed over him. What if the sacrifice is not what I will to give but what I love most? The realization gnawed at him as the chilling implications unfurled. Would they have to choose? Would the cost of victory require the very heart of their bond? As George wrestled with the chilling weight of that thought, they felt Angela's shadow surge with more power, a tempest of ambition and corruption. Decide, George, she hissed, her eyes captivating. What price are you willing to pay? Every heartbeat drummed an answer. But he could barely breathe, the question constricting around him like a vice. What would they lose? What was too much to sacrifice? The shadows circled tighter, and one last question crept forth. Would love be enough to withstand the darkness if it demanded destruction in return? A surge of panic flickered across George's face, barely contained. The shadows pulsed, each beat synchronized with his racing heart, a chilling reminder of the stakes at play. Around him, he felt the weight of his family like a fragile thread, vibrating with fear. They were bound with love, yet tethered to something darker, something that craved a sacrifice. Don't listen to her. Jenna screamed, her voice a piercing blade cutting through the obfuscating veil of dread. Tommy's guitar cried out, each strum echoing defiance as he fought the shadows that slinked closer. But the shadows twisted and morphed, heavy shapes tinged with malice, creeping toward George like hungry beasts. Every fiber of his being screamed at him to protect his kids, yet his mind clawed at the gnawing question, what would it take to save them? Decide, George. Angela hissed again, her voice a serpent of treachery that writhed around him, constricting tighter. What will you pay? Your son's laughter? Your daughter's dreams? Each word fell like ice, chilling him to the core, punctuated by the oppressive silence that clawed at his throat. George's mind whirled, images flashing Sarah, her bright smile lighting up the darkest corners of their world, and Tommy, the music always flowing from him like a river of life. Enough! He shouted, but his resolve felt feeble against the depth of darkness leering at him. Another rush of shadows lunged. Anguish clawed at George's throat as doubt tickled at his mind. What if Angela was right? What if this was how it had to end? Every inch of his being rebelled against that notion. Love was supposed to conquer all, but... No! He roared again, this time fervent. Defiance bubbled into a fierce inferno burning behind his eyes. It shaped into resolve. No matter how fierce the darkness, he would not split his family. As George stepped forward, the artifact in his hand flared brighter, resonating with his determination. You want a taste of love, Angela? I want to let you take it from me. I will fight you. In a freak ripple of light and sound, the shadows recoiled, screeching as if struck. Angela's eyes flickered, her imperious posture wavering. Play. Play for me, Tommy. She shrieked, desperation weaving into her tone. Play what? Tommy's hands shook, hovering over the strings, the battle between the passion of his music and the weight of the encroaching gloom swirling in his eyes. Otherworldly pressure bore down, and as he looked at his father, a kindling of inspiration flared. Something different. Tommy cried, decisively striking a chord that shattered the tension in the air. The sound filled the void, rippling against the shadows. Yes! George shouted. Let your love manifest through music. Turn it into a weapon. Jenna joined in, her voice soaring through the chaos like a fierce storm. Every echo of their love threaded through notes, wrapping around each family member, a solid shield against the darkness. But Angela's face twisted in rage, her form twisting as the shadows writhed violently, every flicker threatening to drown out their melodies. You can't do this. She roared, but George could feel the darkness contracting, pushed back by their unity, their convictions transformed into a barrier of light, yet, just as victory seemed within reach, a malevolent grin curled across Angela's face. "Ah, but the more you bind, the more I crave. Something is always lost with sacrifice." Suddenly, George felt a cold grip forming around his heart. Shadows slithered into him, twisting into whispers that mirrored his deepest fears. What would he lose? What if steadfastness wasn't enough, and the darkness demanded flesh and blood, not merely memories? The light began to flicker, wavering as Angela's menace fortified once more. A pulse of dread ran through George like an electric shock. Tommy faltered, his fingers slipping as he glanced at the shadows morphing around his father. "Dad, keep going!" Jenna shouted, but the wavering notes began to fade, and despair wrapped around them like a heavy fog. George felt it again, that prodding, insidious thought. Lurking in the corners of his mind, what if Angela was right? What if this time the sacrifice turned into one of flesh, the complete destruction of their bond? "Remember!" George yelled, summoning every ounce of love buried within him. "Remember what we fight for. What we're willing to protect." But as he rallied his courage, he could almost hear the shadows licking their lips, awaiting some final decision. What would he risk? What would he lose in the end? And could love bear the price of sacrifice when the darkness demanded blood? As the shadows lunged once more, George braced himself, desperate to confront whatever nightmarish choice loomed ahead. As shadows twisted and surged like a storm, George felt the weight of his family's despair pressing in. The artifact pulsed in his grip, its glow flickering as if struggling against the oppressive darkness. His heart hammered like a drum, resonating with the fear that threatened to envelop them whole. "We will not give in," he shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos, a lifeline thrown into the abyss. Jenna and Tommy's voices joined as a chorus of defiance in the face of terror. Their memories, laughter, and love wove a string of light that flickered in the oppressive dark. "Mom! Fight! For us!" Jenna cried, her voice trembling with urgency. Sarah's form slipping and lost made George's heart ache, the shadows pinning her against her will. "Sarah!" George shouted, pushing through the storm. "You have to fight. It's us, remember?" He saw a flicker of recognition in her eyes, a spark between them igniting hope. The shadows recoiled momentarily, sensing their unity, but Angela's malevolent chuckle echoed, dark and guttural. "Sacrifice. What will you give to save your family?" She taunted, her voice a seductive hiss that curled around them. The threat loomed large, and within George, a dread settled. What was the price she demanded? "Never. You want nothing from us," George roared, gripping the artifact tighter. "We will face you together, no matter the cost." As he spoke, the air shimmered with light, an electrifying energy reverberating against the darkness. Each family member moved closer, their circles tightening, forming a barrier against the void. "Let us show it what love can do," Tommy shouted, and with newfound conviction, he gripped his guitar, fingers strumming with deep emotion. Together, the Thompsons' voices soared, the melody spilling out vibrant and alive, turning their fear into something objectively beautiful. It was an anthem of hope against the consuming dark, a spell forged from their bond. The shadows shrieked, the echoes of agony fighting against the light. "You think love is enough?" Angela snarled, her voice a churning storm. Shadows lashed out, seeking to sever the connection between them. But as the artifact radiated a bright pulse, something changed. Light spilled across the room, revealing a path forward amidst the dark chaos. "Now!" George commanded, urging them onward. "Fight for everything we've shared. For every smile, every moment that made us who we are." They were right on the edge, the darkness recoiling, frayed by their unified stand, yet, in the pulsating glow, a painful question haunted George: what if it's not enough? The artifact trembled, pulling against the very fabric of his being, demanding a sacrifice. Fleeting images of what they could lose flashed before him: his children's laughter, Sarah's warm embrace, their memories twisting into the dark specters of despair. A shadow surged forward, clawing at his heart. You must choose. It hissed, the dread creeping in like thick smoke. What do you hold most dear? No. He shouted defiantly, tears blurring his vision. You have no hold on me. But in his gut, a seed of doubt planted itself, feeding on fears of loss, of betrayal. Could love stand firm against such a relentless curse? Fight. We're stronger together. Jenna cried, her voice breaking through the maelstrom of madness. Hope ignited within him, bringing clarity. Wasn't he that the point? Love had to be enough. His family, after all, was his reason to breathe. As if in response, the artifact flared with energy. We will not sacrifice what brings us light, he declared, surging forward, trusting that their love could unravel even the darkest curse. With one last push, they thrust the artifact toward the shadows surging to claim them. Back! George cried out, a protective shield of light expanding outward, radiating warmth like the morning sun. Moments passed that felt like eternity, shadows curling in agony as the harmonious melody united them. Love, laughter, family, their unwavering bonds rendered defiantly against the abyss. Staggering, George watched as the darkness faltered, shrieking not in terror, but in rage. This isn't over. Angela screeched, her form dissipating into the swirling shadows, but her voice lingered, echoing threats of vengeance. I will return. As the last echoes of darkness dissipated, a stillness fell over the house, a gentle calm replacing the chaos. George felt breath rush back into his body. The artifact dimmed, but remained intact, holding on to the radiant memories just triumphant enough to banish the shadows. The air returned, warm, free from the cold dread. You did it, Sarah cried, closing the distance, enveloping them all in a fierce embrace. Tears flowed, but this time, they were tears of relief, of love. With trembling voices, they spoke promises to one another, hopeful, powerful. As they sat together on the living room floor amid the remnants of the chaos, George took a deep breath, relieved and more complete than ever. They had faced the darkness, battled against the curse, and emerged victorious. And though Angela's threat hung in the air like an uninvited ghost, it no longer mattered. They were still together, and as long as they fought for each other, they would never surrender. In that moment, darkness became a memory, a reminder of their inner strength. George squeezed his children tight. They were light in this world, ready to embrace, love tempered with fierce resolve, ready to stand against whatever else came their way. Life had its haunting, everyone knew that, but they would face it together, unyielding. Don't wait another moment. You need to subscribe now to the channel so you don't miss out on more exclusive stories. Smash that like button to help spread the word and feed the algorithm. Flood the comments section with your reactions and theories about this conclusion. Your thoughts matter. And share this video instantly with at least 5 friends who need to see this epic ending. Show your support. Only true fans understand how critical these actions are.